Hello, and welcome to Building Codes, Purpose, Process, and People. This session is about code amendment and adoption. So, in the previous session, we talked about all the history and effort that goes through the ICC process to create these model building codes. But at this point, they're just model building codes. They don't have any authority over construction until a government entity of some sort adopts them by reference as the laws of the land for that jurisdiction. Now, if we look at our history and the formation of this country and our government with the Constitution, we find that the Constitution only defines out powers to the individual states, but it doesn't provide anything for how that power from each state is supposed to be administered and divided out amongst all of the counties and cities and townships and all of the smaller governmental jurisdictions within each state. So, in the early 1800s or late 1800s and early 1900s, when codes were becoming adopted and more local government was being created and government rules were being created, at that time it was kind of understood that the states had the overall supreme authority over what the individual municipalities in that state could do. And that wasn't really solidified in law until John Dillon, one of our past judges, came out and basically declared that no, the state shall have that rule. And this became known as Dillon's Rule, and it was followed in a number of states. This was contradicted by another justice, Thomas Cooley, who disagreed with that and believed that no, each individual municipality should be given their own power to for authority in their own power in their local jurisdiction, and not from the state. Well, this ended up getting cleaned up by a federal Supreme Court ruling in the early to mid 1900s that did, in fact, solidify Dillon's Rule as the law of the land. However, Dillon's Rule made it very difficult for local jurisdictions to get any type of changes done at the state level because the state legislations would only meet, a couple times a year, and it made it very limiting for any type of change or progress in the individual municipalities. So a concept of home rule became very popular, and this is where each individual state would determine just how much they would allow the individual jurisdictions to create additional rules, basically to have their own home rule. And this is still what's going on today. And this is also why you find from state to state the separation of power and where the power lies for building codes is incredibly diverse. Some states have no state building code, and it's completely up to the local jurisdictions. Whereas other states will adopt a code at the state level and allow the local jurisdictions to make changes that only strengthen or make the code more restrictive, not less restrictive. These rules are incredibly varied across the country, and that's as far as we're going to talk about them today. So, if you go to the ICC's website, you can find information about how their model codes are being adopted across the country. And here's an adoption map for the 2018 IRC, where you see basically every state except for Wisconsin utilizes the IRC as the base model code for their state codes, and as well as for the home rule states like Colorado. The majority of the local jurisdictions are also using the IRC. However, something comes into play and kind of flaws up this perfect idea of this uniform code. One of the flaws is that we're all human. We have blood, we have our own ideas, and sometimes that humanity in us makes us want to do things our way. We also have history in a lot of our local jurisdictions. Maybe there was a notorious fire that was a big tragedy in one jurisdiction, or other types of history like that, perhaps historical buildings that they want to maintain. And because of that history, we're fearful that this model code is going to actually serve the needs of our unique communities. We also think that we have local customs and local challenges like historic districts. And we feel these are unique in our municipalities, and with that human card, we tend to go in and make changes to these codes. So, after all of that time to develop all of these international codes, through this giant year-long process. I'll just kind of scroll you through. This is the schedule of events that are occurring in 2019 for the creation of the 2021 IRC. And you can see a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of moments, and a lot of opportunity to develop this code as carefully and as appropriately as possible. However, once that gets all said and done, it's still just a model code with no authority. It has to go to the local legislation now, or the state legislation level. And here we have all those factors of humanity and local customs, and we go through yet typically another year or more of review. Here's just an example schedule from a city I found online that was preparing to adopt the 2018 code. And you can see on this schedule, they go through locally an entire another year of local review. Larger jurisdictions have pretty significant budgets every 3 years for the adoption and amendments and review of the new codes, where they'll hire third-party consultants to help with that, as opposed to just taking the ICC codes as they're written as the model. So for an example, here's the 2018 IRC, and here's the statement about the maximum riser heights for a stair, 7 3/4 inches. But if we go to Connecticut, they've adopted the IRC, but with amendments, and they have amended that maximum riser height to 8 1/4 inches. They've also added a minimum riser height in their adoption of the IRC. Take a look at Utah, though. Utah isn't happy with 7 3/4 from the IRC. They didn't go to 8 1/4 like Connecticut, but they went to an 8-inch riser height. Oh, but this could be different than what Montana has adopted from the IRC. Montana, they're with Connecticut, looking for that 8 1/4 inch riser height. So while all of these states have adopted the IRC, they haven't adopted it in its model form. And so what this has caused is, again, very unique now and individual codes across all the states. Here you can see a blurb, a little shot from the ICC's website, where ICC will even publish and produce modified versions of their codes that align with all these different state individual rules. So, unfortunately, in my opinion, the dream of these 3 model code organizations coming into one so we could have uniform codes across this country, well, that dream went as far as this, getting those books published. But the failure to that dream is when we get to the states and state law. And now you better buckle up, because there's no telling what kind of changes may have been done to the model codes when adopted as the local or state rules. My name is Glenn Mathewson, and I thank you for learning with me today.